So we'll go to the mover. Councillor Modolo, would you like to present your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Believe it or not, I support a tree retention policy. Conservation of our natural assets is important. Indeed, it's important both to our biodiversity and to our city's identity, the home in the forest, the place I grew up in, and the place my wife and I have chosen to raise our family. The policy in question tonight itself identifies that line we straddle as we choose a life amongst our natural environment. I quote section 1 of the policy, the very first paragraph, which says, and I quote, that there should be an appropriate balance between the need to facilitate development and to retain established trees worthy of retention. Sadly, the remainder of the policy belies its introduction and does not indeed strike that balance. Even prior to being elected onto this council, less than 12 months since the policy's introduction, I was made aware of the unintended outcomes that this policy has achieved. The objectives at section 4.1 of the policy, all 5 of them, are focused on when and how we protect trees. Not one objective identifies what I would consider is real community expectation around when and how we can remove trees when it is justifiable to do so. That's not balance. When this issue was first raised, I decided to myself do some investigation. I've since consulted widely with ratepayers and with interested stakeholders such as arborists and tree surgeons. I thank them for their support in the public gallery this evening and for taking the time to meet with me. Without single exception, the feedback to this policy has painted a picture of bureaucracy, of a lack of empathy, and a total failure of common sense. Make no mistake, the administration of our city is brandishing this policy as a weapon against its own people. Genuine concerns for safety have been ignored, and the administration is acting under this perceived direction of council, which they get from this policy. I submit that they are not acting in line with the expectations of this council, nor are they acting in line with the expectations of our community. It is not the community's expectation that a tree whose trunk is leaning on the roof of a house, making contact with it, would be a tree worthy of retention. It is not the community's expectation that a tree with a trunk you can see through and limbs imminently in danger of falling on a retirement village would be a tree worthy of retention. It is not the community's expectation that elderly residents would be forced to pay $500 12 times a year to get their gutters and valleys cleared because they can't physically do it themselves and they can't touch the one tree on their property. These are 3 real examples of where this tree policy has failed our community. And you want more? I'll give you more. It's not the community's expectation that the administration would take over 10 months to grant it approval after hoop that they made the ratepayer jump through. It is not the community's expectation that a young family couldn't fence in the front yard of their property for the little children to play in because a borer-riddled tree on the way out is still deemed one worthy of retention. Is this really the life that we offer to the kids of the hills and the foothills? Because it's not the city of Kalamunda that I grew up in when we force kids inside on the PlayStation to make sure we protect the right to a peaceful dinner for the polyphagous shothole borer. Let me be clear. The problem's not the administration. It's this half-baked law that we're asked to interpret. So that begs the question, what exactly is a tree worthy of retention? Well, section 5 of the policy is dedicated solely to this topic, and the definition is so broad that it's little wonder it captures trees which pose imminent danger to life and property. Section 5.1b, and I quote, healthy specimen with ongoing viability if not disturbed. To those drafting the policy, that definition may have seemed clear, but we are drafting a local law with real consequences on people. Let me ask you, what is healthy? What is ongoing viability? 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? Because the administration of this city have very different views on those concepts, it seems, even between themselves, as to what is healthy and what is ongoing viability. Surely, David, you ask, we can get an expert to provide evidence on those points. Well, arborists have, and they do. But there is zero compulsion on the city to defer to the view of the expert. In fact, I've seen evidence that the city openly disputes the findings in these reports without providing evidence of their own. Who are we as the city to play judge, jury and executioner? If this policy allows this, and it absolutely does, it goes against the rule of law itself that the government is not above the law. Now let's talk about the consequences of removing this policy, because it's become a tactic of some opposing this motion to suggest that right now the bulldozers are out there lined up ready for the all clear. That is an absolute nonsense and is complete fear-mongering. Firstly, it's my intention in bringing this motion that applications currently in the system would still remain subject to LPP 33. In my experience in law and public policy, it is a legal minefield to change the goalposts midway through the game. We cannot afford that financially as a city, and so I expect that a revocation of LPP 33 would only apply to future proposals. Regrettably, the authors of this shambolic policy have wedged us into this position. Secondly, under the planning framework, the city has scope in making decisions to consider anything that could be defined as works. Now, since this policy came in, we have legal advice that removal of trees falls under the definition of works within the planning framework. Tree removal will still be a consideration by the city in making decisions. Let me state that even simpler. Trees will still be protected. I completely reject this assertion that this will greenlight the wholesale clearing of land and vegetation, because that too is not in line with community expectation, nor this council's expectation. I declare here and now that in revoking this policy, I am committed to a tree retention policy that gets the balance right. And if we are really that paranoid that the nasty people will still get around the law, well, I confirmed with the WA Local Government Association as recently as today that they are finalising a model urban canopy LPP with the input of lawyers specialising in local government law, and which will be available for us to adopt in a matter of weeks. But we cannot leave this policy standing while we wait. The introduction of the policy is inconsistent with the remainder of the document. The objectives of the policy don't strike the balance that they say they should. The definitions of the policy are broad and ambiguous and directly lead to these terrible outcomes that we are witnessing on our city's people. The exemptions too are ambiguous. Yes, there's an exemption in there for trees which pose an immediate danger to life or property. Yet an arborist's view that a limbs will fall on a retirement village was not immediate enough. What is immediate? Do you have to cut the tree down while it's falling? It is entirely unpredictable, and that exemption simply doesn't work. Even when arborists say it's dangerous, the policy is still applied incorrectly because of the wording's ambiguity. Section 13 on street trees refers to a clause 7.7.3 in the policy, and when we go to find that clause, it doesn't exist. This is basic stuff, and it's actually embarrassing. This clearly goes beyond a few tweaks and a few amendments. This is a wholesale rebuilding that is required. In closing, look, and despite how it may seem, this perceived difference in views between us all is actually not that big. Our city's people, including all of us, chose to live here because of our natural assets. I'm not here as a developer. I don't own any shares in any companies. The only property I have in this city is my family's little home in Maida Vale. I don't want to see the trees chopped down at all. I'm a proud boy from this city, the best place on earth, where the bushy hills have been always my backyard. And regrettably, when we choose a life in the hills, there will inevitably be clashes between civilisation and vegetation. The objective should always be to get the balance right. We don't have it right. By revoking this policy, we are saying to the community that we hear you, we got this one wrong, but we'll put our hand up, we'll get the balance right, and we'll come back as a unified community. Thank you.
I will now go to the